All right, so the reality and the truth is that Easter, in every possible way, is rooted in pagan traditions, pagan holidays, pagan gods. This is just the truth. Now, real quick, before we hop into Easter's pagan roots, I need you guys to take a look here. So if you want to join the live Bible study that we do, go to my YouTube, hit live. You've got all the past streams here. You also have the upcoming one where you can hit notify me, and then YouTube will send you a notification when that live starts. It's every Sunday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Central Time. Also, Patreon. If you have any interest in supporting, go there, boom, done. The other thing is we have a private Discord server where everybody from the Bible study meets. But even if you don't come to the Bible study, you're welcome to come to the Discord. You just need to message me on social media to ask for a link because it is private. It is very much closed down and not open to the public. So shoot me a message. I'll get you a link to it. But we all meet here. We talk theology. We talk conspiracy. We talk all sorts of stuff. So we have a good time. And then next thing right here. This dog is incredibly cute. And for that reason and for no other reason, I hope that you hit the like button, subscribe if you're not already, and share this with somebody who might benefit from either the dog or from learning a little bit more about Easter's pagan roots and traditions. All right, let's hop in. Is Easter still today a representation of pagan anything? No, because just like other holidays, Christianity has essentially taken them over, right? And there was good reason for it. And there was proper practice in doing it, you could say, from a Christian perspective. But the reality is, very simply, that these holidays like Easter and like Christmas, they are absolutely and entirely rooted in pagan traditions and holidays and ideologies, really. So Easter itself, the name comes from Ostara. And Ostara is essentially also known as Iestra. Okay, these are pagan representations of a god, right? So Istara in the Anglo-Saxon was the Anglo-Saxon form of, Iestra was the Anglo-Saxon form of Ostara. And this was a Germanic pagan goddess who represented spring as well as fertility. And you're going to see springtime and fertility in much of historical context aligned with each other due to the fact that in the springtime, we see nature in fertility, right? You have, plants, you can say plants that die for the winter and come back in the spring. You see that new life, right? But then in the animal kingdom, we see fertility. This is springtime is when a bunch of babies start popping out, right? So her story, Ostara or Iestra, whichever you want to call the story. It's a story of the transformation of a bird to a rabbit in the springtime, and then the rabbit basically kept the bird's ability to lay eggs because this is an interesting thing people just kind of ignore. Rabbits don't lay eggs; they just don't, right? So nobody asked that question. What does a rabbit to the Easter bunny have to do with eggs? And then why do we color them? We're going to answer all of those questions today, but that's how we got there, right? So in this pagan story, you have a bird being transformed into a rabbit, but the rabbit kept the bird's physical ability to lay eggs. However, these eggs were very special in that the eggs were colorful. So this is the baseline origins of where we get both of those concepts, the rabbit and the egg, from. So the celebration of Easter or Ostara was celebrated each spring to bring in or usher in her as a goddess, as well as all of the incoming spring season things like fertility specifically, as we've kind of already said. It's new life, hence the fertility aspect in both plants and animals. So that is where this comes from. That is the origin of all that. And pagans were huge on nature as well as moon cycles. And that will bring us into the understanding of why Easter is never on a static day, whereas Christmas is, but we'll get there in a minute. So the goddess name Iestra or Ostara, depending on where you're bringing it from, eventually became Easter. And this is just something that happens with a lot of historical traditions, is the name or the phrase or the concept, it kind of shifts over time as it gets passed along from culture to culture and just from generation to generation. Sometimes names change. We see it even in the case of Jesus Christ, right? That was not his name. That is something that over time got shifted. And some people believe that that specific circumstance was intentional and had poor intentions behind it. However, it's kind of beside the point. Due to, or with, I guess, it's just something that happens with historical things over time, with concepts, ideas, ideologies, and names. You have them shift due to just generations telling the story over and over, and at some point it gets twisted, and then also sometimes intentionally. But either way, it eventually became Easter, and this was the tradition of basically magical rabbits that laid colorful eggs for children, all based in the goddess, the pagan goddess that we spoke of earlier. That is the root origin of it. The interesting thing is that only in Germanic and English-speaking countries or areas did Easter adopt that name as Easter, which is very plainly pagan, right? It's like we didn't even try. With Christmas, Christmas is not the pagan representation of the holiday that we adopted from the pagans, because that is a pagan holiday. We ushered in this new name and called it Christmas. Interesting thing with Easter is that we did not do that. We, as well as the Germans, we kept it Easter, which is extremely pagan, because it's the same name as the pagan goddess of fertility that was being worshipped. So kind of interesting. Whereas in other places like France and Greece, they actually kept more of the Passover Christian tradition in lieu of renaming it, or I'm sorry, continuing the name of Easter. They renamed it. So in each of these different countries, they actually have a different name for it, but it has absolutely been changed and is now based on the Passover, similar to Christmas, where we plainly changed the name of the pagan holiday so that it was more Christian in nature. However, over time, even in those places like France and Greece, you see them begin to adopt the commercialist Easter traditions over some of the more traditional Passover traditions that they had held on to much longer than the English and the Germanic areas, right? Which is just kind of interesting. They eventually adopted it as well and went to the commercialism, which is something that we're going to talk about here at the end, because commercialism has now completely taken a grip on Easter, the same way that commercialism and big business has totally taken a grip on Christmas. It's no different. It's no different. But the eggs themselves, beyond what we've already kind of laid out and mentioned, in many pagan traditions and many pagan holidays, are always a representation of fertility and new birth, which makes very much sense, right? It makes perfect sense why that would be a representation of those things, which happen to be things that pagans were very much in tune with, very much involved with, and very much had a respect for. And so much so, it's in a worshiping nature. So in the springtime, many pagans would decorate eggs in celebration of the coming of the spring season, and then they would actually give them as gifts to family and friends. This was just a practice similar to what we practice at Christmas, which is giving gifts to family and friends. And in the case of Christmas as well, it's similar in that that was a pagan tradition as well. The giving of gifts was something the pagans did that we adopted and we continue to do. And now, similarly, we color eggs. I wouldn't say it's a normal practice to give them to family and friends as gifts. However, we practice the coloring of eggs with family and friends as kind of a family tradition, right? And mostly it's for the kids, but adults, I feel like a lot of adults are pretty into it too. But that's where that comes from, right? So they were gifts for families and friends within pagan culture. That is something that they did around springtime to celebrate the ushering in of spring and to worship the goddess of fertility. That's where it comes from. Another interesting kind of thing is that the eating of ham on Easter, which I feel like has kind of died out a bit, but it's still relevant to a lot of people. So the eating of ham on Easter is absolutely, again, a pagan rooted tradition, and practice that we still, in some cases, people still follow it. It's based on Tamus, who was killed by a wild pig or a wild boar. And then the villagers would essentially, they would mourn his death by not eating it for about 40 days. That was how they would commemorate him. And then every year on the first Sunday that followed the first full moon, and this is where we get back into the lunar cycles that the pagans were really, really involved in. They were out, basically all of their holidays surrounded around lunar cycles in one way or another. So as the first Sunday following the first full moon, following the spring equinox, the pagans would then break that mourning cycle of 40 days of no ham, and they would eat a pig to celebrate. I feel like most people don't know that. It's an interesting piece of this. And it's just another thing that we have pulled and kept from the pagan roots, the pagan traditions. Haven't you ever kind of wondered why the day of Easter, and I mentioned it earlier, is not similar to Christmas, and that it is not on a static day, right? Every year, Christmas is on the same day. It's on a static day. Easter is not like that. Easter is following very directly, specifically, a lunar cycle. That is why it is not on a specific day. Christmas is not following a lunar cycle. And with Christmas too, when Christians adopted it, they changed a lot more about it, which is why also the term Christmas is not a pagan term, whereas Easter is a very pagan term. So it's an interesting thing to understand that with some of these holidays, specifically Easter and Christmas, Christians appropriated them. That's the reality. That's what we did. We took them. And it was in the process of ministering and evangelizing to the pagans that we basically went into their culture. We learned about it. We ministered to them. And as people came to Christ and came to Christianity, we would slowly shift their holidays into Christian holidays. And it wasn't with bad intentions. It wasn't for nefarious reasons. It was just that now their gods don't matter. Our God does matter. They now believe in our God. So now we're going to shift the things that they celebrate to make more sense with what they believe now, which happens to be what we believe as well, because we ministered and evangelized to them. So unlike Christmas, Easter was not changed that much. In title, pagan title. In practice, very much pagan practice. In what day we celebrate it on, it still follows the lunar cycle, whereas Christmas does not. Interesting things. Easter is supposed to fall on the first Sunday that follows the first full moon in April. There's that lunar cycle. Pagan holidays are 100% based on lunar cycles. You have to understand that if you want to know anything about paganism. They were obsessed with lunar cycles. They felt everything was based or contingent upon a lunar cycle to one degree or another. Another kind of interesting thing is that the hot cross buns that Christians will bake and has become very much a tradition around Easter time, but really it's become a year-round tradition. Even in pagan culture, they made that, and they even did the cross. So even the cross was not ushered in by Christians. It was not. So the crosses, they were, I guess at that time, they served them at the spring festivals to celebrate Ostara with the cross. And then when Christians adopted those, we just kind of shifted what that cross was supposedly representing, and that now it's a representation of the death and, risen now Jesus Christ. So, but interesting that the pagans even had the cross on it. That is not something that Christians added, which is just an odd thing and kind of a fun thing to understand how that works. But the final, I guess, piece of this that pisses me off is just like Christmas, I would say the majority of culture, at least in the United States, I can't really speak for anywhere else, neither of these holidays are Christian in nature anymore. Really. Like some people go to church for Christmas and some people go to church for Easter. And I'd say that churches on those holidays are similar to the gym in January. You have people who come in and then they do not come back the rest of the year. So, that in and of itself is kind of a good representation of the fact that those holidays don't mean what they're supposed to mean. Because if on Christmas you believe that this is the celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ, who you believe is God, then you're going to go more than just one day a year. It's just a sad reality. And it's no different with Easter. If you believe that this guy was brutally murdered, hung on a cross, and then literally raised from the dead in a beautiful zombie fashion 3 days later, then you are going to go to church more than one time a year, or two if you go on Christmas as well. So that in and of itself represents, obviously, there's a big disconnect with what those 2 days represent and what the people who are going to those events actually believe and how it actually interacts with their lives. But the other piece of it is that it's just commercialism. These things have been, so you have pagan holidays. You have Christians come in and appropriate the pagan holidays. And I believe, years back in church history, Christmas and Easter probably were celebrated in a more genuine, authentic way. And then you have big business coming in and adopting what Christians adopted from pagans. So these holidays, pagan root, Christmas appropriation or adoption, and then you had big business and commercialism come in and adopt it from Christians. So that now I would say the majority of Christmas focus is on commercialism. You're buying lights, you're buying gifts, you're buying decorations, you're spending a bunch of time decorating your house, wrapping presents for people, doing anything but focusing on what the holiday is about. So interesting progression of these holidays that began pretty pure with the pagans were adopted by Christians. And again, I would say a pretty pure fashion for good intentions. And then at a point you have commercialism and big business adopt it from Christians who adopted it from pagans. And you have big business absolutely bastardize the holidays in every possible way, in every possible conceivable way, have just destroyed it. So that now it's all about spending. It's all about Santa. It's all about the Easter bunny. The malls are charging you $90 to go have your kids take a picture with somebody in a costume. Like, these things have become anything but what they are meant to represent, which is extremely sad if you stop and think about that for a minute. It's extremely sad to see where things have gone. But that's kind of the sick culture that we live in now, where things that once had meaning have been stripped of their meaning. And then business comes in and they try to, take what they can get. And they've been able to do it very, very well. And it's become a multi-billion-dollar industry every year between the two holidays, just themselves, Christmas and Easter. Multi-billion dollars for big business and companies to just extract money from people. And for that to kind of grow. Think about Christmas specifically, but even Easter, where it starts with, there was a little bit of decorating. There were some lights on the house. There were maybe a few things up in your house. And then eventually the commercialism really took over. And now there's people that they literally have thousands and thousands of dollars worth of decorations that go outside their house, inside their house. They spend all this time putting so much money into making their house look like Christmas. And the reality is what they're making their house look like has absolutely nothing to do with Christmas. It has nothing to do with the holiday. It has nothing to do with Jesus being born. It has to do with what commercialism has turned Christmas into. And the same thing goes for Easter. They're just sad realities. But this is the world we live in. So I hope you enjoyed that. Have a lovely day. I love y'all. Happy Easter.